Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the DDT Method podcast. Today, I'm sitting down to talk about all things coaching and performance with Adam Bisek. Adam's one of those guys that is on an eternal quest for knowledge. Reminds me of myself. That sounds conceited. Adam's actually somebody that I really look up to in the industry, and he's a coach that I try to model my own actions after. He's in a relentless pursuit to better himself in every single aspect. We have several of the same certifications, but he's gone above and beyond what really anybody else that I know of in the fitness industry has done as far as bettering himself as a coach. When it comes to continued education, this is somebody that stops at nothing to be able to solve any problem for any client that might come his way. And in doing so, he's become a resource of information beyond what even he seems to realize that he is. This is a guy that has done a deep dive into all aspects of what we do, from the training side of things to the nutritional side of things to supplements to PEDs. He's somebody that can solve a multitude of problems in a multitude of different ways, and he's the type of coach that we should all aspire to be in the coaching industry. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into several different topics, and you're definitely going to learn something that you can apply not only to your coaching of other people, if you are a coach, but to your own training, your own nutrition, your own supplementation. And we provide a pretty unique commentary on the fitness industry, on the coaching side of things, kind of in general. This is one of my favorite interviews that I've done, and I think it's going to be one of yours as well. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the DDT Method podcast. Guys, we're here with Adam Bisek. Adam's been a coach in the industry for, like I said, about 20 years, give or take. And one thing that I love about this guy, and this is kind of why we connected as friends almost immediately, is we share almost identical mindsets in that you need to be a student of the game long term. There is such a fucking issue these days with coaches that have been tenured coaches for all of 3 years that think that they know it all, they've done it all, and they're basically basing everything they do off of a couple of YouTube videos and the fact that they've been working out since they were 20 years old. Whereas the real way to be successful, no matter what anybody tells you, is to always keep learning. And you guys have heard me say that 1,000 times, and I can't stress it enough. But this isn't about me rambling about my experiences. This is about learning more about Adam. So Adam, give us a little bit of background on kind of what brought you to the game and what kind of shaped your mindset.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of started when it wasn't cool, right? I mean, 20 years ago, being like a personal trainer wasn't like a glorious career to have. And now it's like, you know, you're famous on Instagram if you're a trainer, if you have a six pack. But, you know, when I started, I fell in love with diet, with training because of track and field. I was 110 high hurler. And I was not by any stretch of the imagination a good athlete. But when I think it was my junior year, I started, was terrible. You don't know any numbers, but I ran like a 20-second 110. Horrible, very slow. By the end of the year, I was like third team all conference. So improved pretty well. And then in that off season, you know, I loved it. I loved, obviously, anything you're good at, you love doing. And so I started looking into training more, looking into nutrition more, and employing that. And by the next year, conference champion, you know, yada, yada, yada. And so I fell in love with how diet and exercise can improve my physicality, and then kind of, you know, the vain part of me in how I look thereafter. And from there, went to school for it, 4-year degree in it, was an intern at Mayo Clinic, then went into the private sector at Lifetime Fitness, and then started my own business in 2012. So I've been doing this. I got certified through the NSC, I think I was 18, 19. So going on 20 years, right? And been a student of the whole industry. You know, I've had a published research study, was a trainer on a couple of them, and can never stop learning. I absolutely love that. Love it more than teaching, but teaching's part of the game too.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And when you say you never stop learning, I mean, we don't just mean like we're reading stuff here and there or just popping in and reading a research study, which I'm sure we both do, but like you're continuously getting certifications. You're continuously diving into different avenues of learning different aspects, and you're continuing with higher education. What's some of the stuff that you've continued to do over the last few years?
So I'm taking a little bit of a break from it, but I started my master's degree in functional and integrative nutrition this last year. and people probably watching this are familiar with the concept of functional nutrition. Functional integrative. This means looking at like the conventional model of medicine, treating an ill with a pill type of thing, versus changing lifestyle, but also being able to speak between the two modalities. The reason I'm currently taking a break is I was doing very well, but finding that the field hasn't progressed enough to where I was writing papers based upon what I already knew, not the course content. So I was paying money basically to do my own research that they told me to do. But inevitably, like you said, whether it's taking certifications, if we have clients who have a problem, we're researching that, whatever you want to qualify as that, but we're always consistent in learning. And I just absolutely love human physiology. I love practicing it on myself, which is why we're kind of our own guinea pigs the last 2 decades. And shout out to you because you look fantastic right now, dude. Like you're really...
It's purely a midlife crisis, but thank you.
Which number? Because I'm on number 3.
So this is probably 4 or 5 to be honest, but this one seems to be paying off.
But no, I think you're right in speaking to anybody who's effective at what we do has to continue to learn, not necessarily because human physiology is changing, but we're learning so much more about it. Right. So that's why you have to stay on top of your game. And I think you spoke about this in a previous podcast. There's so many different types of coaches. We have the antiquated coach who was a bodybuilder 20 years ago, who's still using principles that probably work, but not understanding why. You have people now who've never actually worked with a human being in the real world, but there's so much awesome education available at our fingertips that they're coaching people too. And so we have this broad, very, vast spectrum of different coaching abilities. Not that there's a lot of great ones out there. I shouldn't say that there are, but there's more so there's a lot of bad, which is what we're trying to dispel.
One thing that I like to tell clients constantly is, and not just pertaining to the people out there that they're paying attention to, but just concepts in general, there's like 1,000 right ways to do something, but unfortunately there's about 1 million wrong ways. So it's about sifting through all these negatives to find these positives. And the one thing that just continuously happens, and you touched on it before, is that you have people reaching this level of notoriety based on what appears at the surface level. And it's almost cliche because I hate to be the somewhat educated guy sitting here talking about how these kids don't take time to learn things and yada, yada, yada. I feel like Clint Eastwood sitting on my porch with a shotgun. But it's just one of those things where it's like, it really is the case. It really is the problem. But the problem is not so surface level in that it's just, these kids think they know everything, because every generation says that about the upcoming generation. And a lot of times it's just because things are different and we might not be as receptive to the new ways that people are doing things. But what we're seeing here is we're literally seeing this because we're still very early in the social media era. We're maybe 10 to 15 years into this really being a thing. And we're still at the point where people are really catching on, because at the end of the day, people buy people. People don't necessarily buy things. So selling yourself is integral. You and I have to sell ourselves all the time, despite the fact that we have these backgrounds. We have the knowledge that we've accumulated. We have the passion and desire to get better. People still very much buy Drew and Adam. And then they just so happen to luck into the fact that we know what we're doing. And that goes for almost all intelligent coaches. I can't think of one very successful, even hyper-intelligent coach that's like watching paint dry. I'm sure there's a few.
Yes.
But it's the fact it's people are buying people. The problem with that is it's very easy to buy a person despite their shortcomings on the other end of it. And we live in this time where there's more knowledge accessible at our fingertips than ever before. We have these supercomputers in our pockets 24/7, where somebody like you, somebody like myself, somebody like the people that we surround ourselves with, we can utilize these to find these resources to continue to learn. Whereas other people are using them to maybe watch what I always pick on Hani Rambod just because he's super popular and he is a smart guy, but people are using their resources to search what's Hani doing and then just copying it and then going, well, he coaches Mr. Olympias, and there's no actual understanding to it. Like, what do you think is causing all this? What do you think? Is it just this drive for success without this desire to really do good? Because it baffles me.
I think it's a lot of things. I think our wisdom that we have helps us to distill the information that we're seeing. And to the layperson or someone who's new to the industry, seeing something, well, Hani coaches, he coached Bumstead, he coached, Derek, was it Phil? So he must know everything. So everything he does must be awesome. So I'm just going to copy it. Well, that's, it seems intuitive, but that's not the case. We have a fundamental idea of the principles that govern human physiology. And so we can kind of appraise the information. Like we have a bullshit meter, right? We can appraise what we're seeing, whereas someone who's new to the game, they can't. They're going to go off of what they see. And unfortunately, in our industry, it is 100. It's very, very visual, right? It's whether, someone looks good and shit. If you look good and you're articulate, you're printing money. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think that what it is people aren't able to, one, distill the information properly. They don't have the right filters. They don't have the background in it. And it's quick and easy. They want to make money. There's a lot of money to be made. That's why I tell people in terms like you're a coach, I'm a coach, Tim's a coach. We have a lot of coaching friends. There's way more people than we could ever coach. It's not about competition. Right. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it is. It's just people trying to make a quick buck, people not having the wisdom. If it was this easy, could you imagine when you started, if we had N1, if we had Tom Purvis, if we had Prescript, if you had Dwayne Jackson, if you had all these people to learn from rather than just trying to find stuff in a book? Yep. Like how much further ahead would we have been?
Ciphering through the forums, trying to just dig out what good information we had there. I just spoke with Skip Hill last week on an episode, and we were talking about the forums and everything like that and how it was just a different conduit of information. But even that was almost better because we didn't have that many voices chiming in. And if a voice chimed in that was so insanely off kilter that we knew the information was wrong, you had senior members of the forum instantly sniffing that person out, banning them for life, throwing a bunch of horrendous non-PC insults at them, and then that person would never show up again. Now with social media, everybody has their own echo chamber that's supported by their own following, and that makes it even harder to break down what information is good and what information is bad. Again, it goes back to 1,000 right ways, but 1,000,000 wrong ways, and it just gets so difficult to decipher that.
Yeah.
Now, if we break everything down, we can go piece by piece on how the ball is being dropped in every facet of all this because people are just kind of winging it. So let's talk a little bit about training, because I know you are one of the biomechanics guys out there, and you might be humble about it, but I'm going to be not humble for you. You're one of the absolute best when it comes to biomechanics, exercise selection, programming. You get it because you get it below the surface level. You get how it works. Where on the flip side, we have all these people out there writing plans, or even not coaches, people putting together their plans for themselves that are just kind of winging it on a bro split and just doing a bunch of shoulder exercises on a shoulder day and maybe doing more exercises on a chest day because they have a weak chest and doing leg exercises on a leg day. And they're trying to decipher between doing that or like push-pull legs or some sort of hybrid program, but they're just kind of winging it and not really knowing why they're putting things together in such a way. So touch a little bit on what's your approach to training specifically. When somebody comes to you and they want to do something, they want to accomplish a goal, whatever it is, how are you breaking down how you're building the training?
Well, I think one thing that's really important is because online training is so massive now, is that I shouldn't say I didn't online train. I online trained relatively early in my career because it was maybe 2013. But I've logged so many hours of working with people in the real world. You begin to understand how they learn, how they think, how things work, how things fall apart, how to give particular cues. So I think there's a disparity now where there's so much information in terms of exercise mechanics, in terms of all the, if you call it the science bros, in terms of exercise variables, what volume should you use, what intensity, and all those arguments, that it's hard to parse out what, if you've never worked with a real person, or, I think I passed 20,000 hours of PT a year or two ago. That's a lot of skin in the game to where I know how things happen in the real world. So now when I sit right here and do check-ins and do exercise audits, I have all of that, the wisdom from that to be better at that than someone who's never worked with a real person. But I think when it comes down to it, you have to work with who's in front of you. You can't, like you said, you can't pick up what is Hani doing because he's working with Chris Bumstead. He can basically do any type of exercise regimen. It's going to work. So you can't do that. You have to see the person in front of you, do a real appraisal of how they move, their exercise history, what they like doing. I remember when I was with Prescripts, and I used to be friends with a very, glute dominant known trainer. And I was going through Prescript, and Jordan Shallow was talking about the hip thrust and how it's probably not the most efficacious for growing the glutes because of X, Y, and Z's, very legitimate reasons. But he goes, but if someone really likes doing it, you better believe I'm going to put in their program. I'm going to find a way. And so it really comes down to appraising the individual in front of you, using all the principles you begin to learn. Because like you said, there's 1,000 ways you can make it happen. There's a lot more ways to make it go wrong, but it always has to be tailored to that person. And you hear that, people say that so often because it's easy to say, but truly, are you appraising how someone moves from the onset? Are you appraising how they progress? Are you doing audits of their exercises? Whether, if you're doing it online, having them video themselves, making sure they're executing correctly. It's very important to do that. And again, you can't do that well if you haven't worked with real people in the real world. One, but you also have to have that, but then also understand exercise mechanics to a level that you can help who you're working with. And I tell that to trainers all the time. And my girlfriend's starting some training, and she's like, well, I'm not, as good as you. So you don't need to be. You need to know more than the person in front of you. Do no harm and help them. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is looking at the person in front of you and applying principles of exercise to them based upon what they're showing, what they like, what they need, who they are, and not just arbitrarily.
100% agreed. 100% agreed. I could not have said that better myself. One thing that you did say that really stood out there was that that anything works, I should say. So you put in the case of Chris Bumstead. So let me articulate better, because I was trying to recap in my mind exactly how you said it while I was saying it. When it comes to somebody like Chris Bumstead or any complete genetic freak of nature, anything will work to an extent. Now, I'm going to raise the bar on that a little bit and say that anything with consistency works for anybody to an extent. And this is where the waters get muddied, because when I see a new, or maybe not a popular online coach that's catching on, but it's one of those where we can see what they're doing and we're like, oh, geez, I don't know if they know what they're doing. And then maybe it gets to a point where we see one of the plans that they're writing and we're like, oh yeah, they don't know what they're doing. But then the argument is, but look at this before and after, or look at this placing at this regional show, or look at the progress that this client has made. The problem is we have this really weird situation going on right now where fitness is becoming more and more popular and trendy year by year. And that is fantastic. Yeah. And now that's only going to continue with more and more technology, more people spending more time in the metaverse. We have an administration now that could potentially be pushing fitness as a bigger deal. We have all these different things going on that's making fitness cooler. It's cooler to be jacked. It's cooler to be at the gym. It's cooler to kind of brag about going to the gym. So we're having more people get into it, and we're having people getting into it from a place where they have no idea what they're doing. So if you take somebody with even average genetics that goes to the gym once or twice a week and then takes 2 or 3 weeks off, they make up a couple exercises, they slap them together, they have a protein shake sometimes, maybe they have creatine a few days a week, and then they go on a structured plan for the first time ever, and they relatively stick to it. The problem is, even if the plan sucks, they're going to make progress. And then the problem compounding upon that is extreme things do work externally, meaning that if you have somebody that you're prepping for a show and you just put them on some drugs, you take away their carbs, and you make them run on a treadmill for 4 hours a day, at some point, they're going to have abs, they're going to have veins, you're going to see their muscles, and maybe if they go to the right show and they have more abs, more muscles, and more veins than the other guy next to them, they might even win that show. And then that's used for marketing, and then that happens again and again and again, and that coaching platform or that team or those people or that person continue to grow. And then coincidentally, they bring on people and those people bring on people. And then we have this whole community of people that are, hey, this works. We do that. And there's no need for education. And that's what we're seeing more and more and more. So keeping in mind, so I don't end up rambling about my frustrations for 40 minutes here.
No, that's good, because what you just explained is, I don't know, 70, 80% of the industry. If we're talking about just bodybuilding, any team you see, you just explained it exactly.
That's literally what's going on everywhere. And I say it goes outside of bodybuilding. We just have to take away the bodybuilding shows as the example, because unfortunately, physique competitions on the internet are the vocal minority. So that ends up influencing the lifestyle clients as well. So looking at that and looking at the fact that arbitrary exercise split written and just given out to everybody, it's going to work because consistency works. Keeping that in mind, how do you go about structuring an exercise program for somebody specifically? Like, what is the best way to build a split for somebody? And let's put an avatar on it. Let's put an average girl that wants to compete in, let's say, bikini or wellness. So glutes are the main focus, but they need a little bit more musculature in their upper body, but is really a lower body dominant type thing, because that's a lot of situations out there. How would you go about building that? How do you know what to prioritize, and how do you build it? How do you build volume? How do you build the frequency? How do you select the exercises, assuming that you don't have any access to this person in real life? It's all online.
Well, and the first thing comes to, who are we talking about? When we have an avatar of this person who wants to compete, probably a bikini athlete, but what have they been doing up until this point? Right? Appraising. So I can't know where to start if I don't know where they're coming from. So that's important. If I have someone who's completely new to it, I'm not going to blast them with a 6-day split, because if they haven't even been weight training at all, which is probably not most people, that wouldn't be appropriate. If I would say the average person of that archetype would start somewhere between a 4-day split, which is an upper lower, or a 5-day split where lower is hit 3 times and upper is hit twice. Pretty pragmatic. If something is that frequent, 5 days a week, the volume might not be too high, right? I might even undulate within the week, where some days intensity is higher, some days, volume is higher, intensity is lower. But this, from a split standpoint, that archetype, more often than not, I see like a 4-day upper lower split, or 5-day 3 lowers, 2 upper, right? And again, what equipment do they have access to? What gym? If they're going to a commercial gym, they probably have a lot. Going back to, what exercises do they enjoy doing? If they really want to do a hip thrust, they're going to be doing a hip thrust, right? Trying to find what's a mix of the most effective movements with what they enjoy doing, right? Because I'll have some people too, and you've probably had this as clients, they want to be in the gym all the time. And you have to almost satiate that want to be in the gym and almost manipulate it so they're not actually doing as much each day, but getting in them more often. Right? Whether it's doing, mobility-based work, or getting them in there with just lower amount of volume for that day. And so you really have to tend to the person, their personality, where they're coming from, and of course, what their goal is, right? And then as you're doing that, that's just the program creation, right? As you know, as a coach, you have to dynamically watch this over time. How are they executing movements, right? If a plan that you put together, which you're envisioning happening, may not be what's happening. And so I need to see you everyone has one of these in the gym anyways. Put it up mostly to your side and videotape the exercise so I can make sure you're doing it right. I cannot tell every time a client does that, I have something to critique and improve every time. And until a movement is done to the point where I go, you know what? You got this down. You don't need to video it anymore. We should probably keep doing it. I know it's a pain in the ass, but if you want to get the most out of it, don't you think you want to do it the way that it's in my head, the way that it should be done? So it is that. It's who is the person right away, getting it, put together specifically for them, but also, again, watching how they do it, because just as important, if not more important than the program that you put in place, is how is it being done, right?
100% agreed. Now, in structuring that program, taking into consideration intensity, frequency, and volume. These things all have to be correlated. So how do you go about putting together a program, maneuvering one way and one the other way? How do you build that?
Mm-hmm. Most of the time when I'm starting off someone, again, based on where they're coming from, I'll probably start off with lower intensity, lowest volume tier. And so both variables are kind of pulled back because I'd rather start from a place of not doing quite enough yet than doing way too much. And so maybe starting at a higher rep tier, higher reps, 10, 12, 15. Whatever someone's stance is on which rep range is going to be best for hypertrophy. I like to start there because the possibility of somebody getting injured is less with lower load, right? At least in my opinion. And again, starting at the lowest volume tier, more than likely, I'll probably increase volume over time as they get acclimated, as they're making progress. And I like kind of periodizing from a mesocycle standpoint, maybe this volume where a tier is higher volume and it's not as high in intensity. And then switching that with a mesocycle where there's maybe we're working in a 6 to 8 rep range, a 6 to 10 rep range more. And I don't do that every time, but the main sentiment there is I'm probably starting off with someone new. I don't care what they're doing before. I don't care what everyone that comes to us, it says they can handle more or they've probably been doing too much. So I start them off at the lowest amount, the lowest effective, dosage of everything, see how they respond, and then escalate from there.
So how do you choose what to escalate? Why are you deciding to escalate volume as opposed to load or load as opposed to frequency?
Really, it's in how they respond, right? I think I don't know if there's a consensus on which one is going to be better for hypertrophy. There are probably people that argue either way. I think that's a pretty contentious topic right now with whether it's more intensity or it's more volume. And to be completely honest, a lot of it, and this is going to sound freaking woo-woo, a lot of it is feel. A lot of it is feel as a coach. And I know that sounds like kind of the archaic coaches like we talked about before, but that's part of coaching is knowing how all these principles govern change, but also being able to go off of your anecdotal experience and seeing what's going on paired with, and this is the evidence-based model, paired with what is the person like, what do they enjoy doing, what do they need, right? And so I'd say in terms of knowing which one to escalate first, it just comes down to how they respond. And I'd rather work with someone new on that volume knob, working on their form rather than working on the knob of intensity, insofar as intensity is probably the load on the bar, right? Now, if it's somebody who I'm working with who is more experienced, I feel confident in their execution because I've audited things, I'm more apt to probably play with that intensity knob because they know what they're doing. They're doing it correctly.
Now, when you're moving one, something else does have to move, correct? I mean, you can't just increase volume and frequency, maybe in the beginning to a reasonable degree, but at some point, there's only so much recoverable volume that anybody can handle within a given week. We'll call it a week just because it's easier to block mesocycles into a 7-day period. But looking at things like that, if frequency is going up, at what point do you stop increasing the volume? And I know it is going to be case by case, but are you looking at like the maximum recoverable amount of volume and just splitting that up over the course of like a 7-day period over the course of a block? Or are you just kind of pushing the limits on both of them to see where the person can land?
Yeah, I guess I'm using some of those kind of those variables of maximum recoverable volume, maximum effective volume, and it's in the back of my head. But what I use, again, is what is in front of me. In my app, I have people log the loads they're using. And I'll oftentimes with people look at autonomic nervous system biometrics like resting heart rate and HRV and seeing, are they still progressing? Or are their autonomics looking good? If those things are trending in the right direction, there's nothing in the scientific literature that's going to make me stop them continuing to go in that direction. Now, if they start trending in the wrong direction, that's when I know how to dial those knobs. And the thing about it is that might be an inter and intra week thing, right? And helping your clients understand what those metrics mean, and I'm not a slave to the metrics also. I won't make decisions purely on the fact that their HRV is down because that's going to happen. Right. But I use all those things together to summate and create a decision.
Now, while you're watching those metrics, are those coming into play for making decisions on when to change to a different training block or maybe change the training stimulus? What are you looking out for to know when it's time to change somebody's training?
Lack of progression. Biggest thing is once we are no longer getting better, it's got to change. Right? Something's got to change. And, I'll admit, when you first start, we'd have these from school, these arbitrary blocks of time that you were supposed to have a mesocycle or a macro cycle in, the old periodization models. But you come to find out, like, dude, if someone's still like, I don't care, again, what arbitrary number I put in place. So we're going to do this for 8 to 12 weeks. I tell clients, if you're getting better, why am I going to step in? Let's keep getting better. And so I just try to really keep an eye on that, not only myself and looking at their loads, but also I ask for that subjective feedback. I ask for that from them every week is, how is performance? Are there movements stagnating that we need to swap out? Because I'm also not a slave to the fact that every single movement needs to stay in the program for the entirety of the program. If something starts to stagnate, if something doesn't feel right, if a piece of equipment gets removed from your gym, okay, we got to change it. But if this thing is still working, let's keep it still working, right? And so that it starts to fall outside of those maybe more antiquated models of periodization, insofar as I might, again, change some exercises, but not others, based upon what's still working.
Now, speaking on periodization, because that's almost a lost art, and in some cases, it might be almost an unnecessary one, not to speak pure blasphemy in terms of training. But do you prefer to take more of a linear periodization model where you're just progressing forward and then changing some specifics? Or have you ever used block periodization, maybe in terms of stimulus, where there might be a more neuro-based block or strength-based block feeding into a hypertrophy-based block, feeding into something that might be more metabolically demanding or training more built for body comp with a side of hypertrophy as opposed to strictly trying to grow? Or is everything just straightforward progression in that hypertrophy model and then changing the movements or changing the specifics? How do you prefer to actually periodize for clients?
I would say I've done, if we want to break this into dichotomously into two different camps, I would say I've done both. Because I work more with Gen Pop, because the lion's share of people that I work with, they want to change how they look. I mean, that's who I work with, right? And so I'm probably toggling in what we might consider a hypertrophy-based stimulus or adaptation that we're chasing, but I may work on one end that might be closer to strength adaptation. And then I might toggle again a different mesocycle that's more, if we want to call it metabolic. It's the amount of work they're doing or time under tension is slightly different, right? And I think the way that I look at this from a periodization standpoint is much like I look at a lot of things is, you know what, I'm not just going to go and go, you know what, we're just going to see what happens. Of course, I go in with this kind of default plan that we could call periodization. And I use that as kind of like, like when you're bowling, you have the bumpers. That's kind of like my bumpers. And then I make changes within that based upon how the person responds. Because if you look at I could be wrong here, look at all those kind of older school, so to speak, periodization models. They're from like the sport, right? They're from team sport. And I work with one person. And so it's and you talk to strength and conditioning coaches, and we've done both. Coaching a team or even a group, more than one person is different than coaching one person in how you deliver, right? And so, yeah, periodization from its more antiquated or older viewpoint, I'm not rigid in terms of employing that. I just use it more so as like a compass. We're going in this direction, but oh yeah, I'm making changes along the way because it's never going to play out exactly like that. I think coaches want, not us, but at large, like we were talking about, probably the less effective, newer coaches. Of course, people want a template. Everyone wants a template. It makes it easier. And I love the way that, Prescript does this and Shallow does this. And I remember it stuck with me so well. I was like, I'm not teaching you what to think. I'm teaching you how to think. Right. And so we need to know how to apply these things. Yes. Could you put a template in place and it work? Like you noted earlier. Oh yeah. Anything can work, but how well? And I would argue that if you have to be able to change and auto-regulate and modify based upon what's in front of you, you can't just stick almost ever to a template.
Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth at the end of the day. That really is the case. And the perfect program doesn't exist in this pre-existing state. The perfect program is potentially some structure that's still this living and breathing thing that has to be maneuvered and changed as you go, because variables are a part of life. Life is variables. It's a collection of variables. So let's backtrack a little bit into when to pull different triggers and whatnot. Talking primarily about, let's say, bodybuilders as a general reference. So let's say bodybuilders and Gen Pop that just want to look better. Why is it important for these type of people to do blocks of training where they are focusing on getting stronger?
I think that, if you think about it this way, just in the simplest fashion, right? And you don't have to be someone that's educated to understand this. We're going to use arbitrary numbers. Let's say you can use 100 pounds for 10 reps. You're going to have a certain outcome over time. What if you could do 150 pounds for 10 reps? You're probably going to have, even though 10 reps isn't like a strength-based repetition prescription, if you get stronger, you're going to get bigger. They're not a one-for-one, correlation, but all else being equal, strength isn't a weakness, right? If you can do more weight for a given repetition range, if you're trying to build muscle, you're going to build more muscle. It's the whole, that is in of itself progressive overload, progressive overstimulus, right? So the value there is your muscle is not going to change. In the most simplest way to put it, it's not going to change if you don't challenge it with something more. Right. And of course, it could be more volume, could be more reps, but until what end? Right. You're not going to be doing 40 reps per set. Right. We eventually have to get stronger, and inherently getting stronger is going to make you bigger. And if you have more muscle, you're going to look leaner. It's also going to, you'll be able to hold more muscle as you lose body fat. So it's a benefit really to anybody. Right. Being, like I said,
agreed.
Being stronger is never a weakness.
Exactly. Now, pivoting over to nutrition a little bit, I think some of the most common pitfalls that we're seeing is just an overly simplistic approach, which again, people will refuse to change because consistency, even in the less than ideal approach, works. So what do we end up seeing? It's always kind of the normal. They get an incredibly bland diet. That bland diet starts probably too low on carbs to begin with. And then over time, carbs are decreased and carbs are decreased. And carbs are decreased, and cardio is increased, and cardio is increased, and cardio is increased. So we have food just being driven lower from an arbitrary carbohydrate standpoint, and we have output being driven higher to thus drive a deeper deficit. And that seems to be the only lever people have to pull. What are some of the problems that can come from that?
It works once. It works once. How many people have you seen, they do one show, and this is more so you see it with females. They one show, decently lean, and they are ruined thereafter. It's what happens thereafter from an adaptation standpoint, right? It's neglecting everything else thereafter. Like I said, you can get someone lean once on the equation of more activity, less food. But after that, what do? That's where everything breaks down. And that's where having a more educated approach at just not being a meathead, right? Yes, of course that works. Because if you're somebody who's getting all you get from your coach is an email of eating less and doing more, fire them. But how many people do that, right? It takes skill to help someone figure out how to make foods, include foods that they like, right? To make sure that they're not experiencing nutrient insufficiencies, to look at lab work, even though we're not doctors, and able to see, strategically change things in their diet to address what's going on and appraising those things, right? And it takes more work at the end of the day, and it takes more skill.
Does somebody have to wind up on ultra low or zero carbs when they make it to that final week before a bodybuilding show to be absolutely peeled?
No. I think you and I have I mean, I've gotten ultra lean. And when I say ultra lean, it's probably like I've been in the fours on a DEXA scan 4 times. And most of the time I'm 400 and 500 grams of carbs per day. Mm-hmm. But the thing that's different is I live my lifestyle at what people might consider 8 to 12 weeks out. Right. So I don't have to crash and burn, because then inevitably it comes down to, for a lot of people that have to get that low on carbohydrates, it's just a function of getting lower calories and you not timing things out correctly. Right. Mm-hmm. Because you shouldn't ever have to get lower than, well, I don't want to throw out any specific number because it's going to be different for every single person, but you don't have to go. I don't see any need for that ever. Granted, I would say that when you're dieting, especially in this realm of bodybuilding, more than likely we keep protein static. Secondly, fat's relatively static. Carbohydrate's going to be the largest variable, but that doesn't mean it needs to go to 0.
How does Carb Necessity match up with the type of training that somebody's doing?
I would say for most people, if we talk about especially if you have higher volumes, right? You just have greater amount of energy expenditure and you are utilizing these substrates more, that being glycogen or glucose. Yeah, your necessity is going to go up. And I think that, again, you're going to have to watch the person. You have to obviously look at who's in front of you. But for the lion's share of people that train 4 days a week in resistance train, you're probably not completely depleting your glycogen stores in your weight training sessions. And again, there's an art to this too. And if we're talking about competitive bodybuilders and bikini athletes and knowing when someone is depleted, but usually that's going to take over a course of days or weeks. It's not going to happen within a day. And I think we know that from the research in terms of the only time you have to be worried about, intraday carbohydrate feeding is going to be with 2-a-day, sessions with someone who's probably more of an anaerobic based athlete where there's a lot higher energy expenditure. Probably not your person who's doing 15 sets of upper body and then getting 10,000 steps a day. And you're not taxing those stores on a daily basis.
Right. Now, in a situation where those carbs have come down significantly lower, let's say maybe not 0, but much lower than they would normally be for any sustained amount of time due to the necessity of a deadline for a bodybuilding show, photo shoot, anything like that. How do you adjust the training? Because in my experience, if glycogen is incredibly low and we're taxing glycogen or attempting to tax glycogen as an energy system, that's a surefire way to not only create a ton of oxidative stress, but to start cleaving into muscle tissue because your body's going to try to start making glycogen out of the amino acids. What do you do with the training when that's the case, especially if we're just a few weeks out and, we're trying to push balls to the wall. We want to get these results. We're trying to dial it in. Is that the time to back off on training, or do we change the training to match the carbohydrates? Do we implement a refeed? What are some of our options there?
I mean, there are a ton of wrong answers, but I think there's a handful of right answers there. And that also goes to, why are we at this point? If you're 2 to 3 weeks out, if we did things correctly, we should be able to, and probably should be, pulling back on the level of systemic taxation your training's giving you, right? Because if we talk about, insulin sensitivity when it comes to increasing stress, physiological stress, if we want to measure at the level of hormones like cortisol, it's not going to have a positive impact. And I think we see this all the time because a lot of people, their only levers are doing more activity, less food. How many people have you seen literally stress them out of a good physique in the last week? Oh man, I look great the week before. Well, why don't you just take a fucking break? You literally would have done better by taking naps and not training at all the week beforehand, And so I think what it comes down to is, if you're in that final push and you have to push, you did something wrong. That's the time where we're pulling back, right? Because we want to lower stress. Your physique, when stressed, it doesn't look good. Certainly doesn't look its best. And so again, that's where we are pulling back. I would rather pull back on food than increase activity as a kind of a general heuristic in that scenario.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned only having a limited number of levers. And when you mentioned that, the one thing that just keeps coming into mind are PEDs. So PED education or lack thereof in my opinion, is not only one of the most potentially detrimental things to somebody's health, obviously, but their actual overall progress, because we are dropping the ball as an industry on this one big time, because people are looking at PEDs as you got steroids that make you big, you've got steroids that make you hard. Neither of those are really things, by the way. And then you have your fat burners, and those are classified as basically clenophenedrine and thyroid hormone. Where does this limited window of PED use really come to bite us all in the ass? And how big of a horizon are we missing out on? What else is out there?
Well, I think the first thing to understand is, one, we're not doctors. I think you and I would both admit, even though we have a greater level of competency in performance-enhancing drugs, we still are not experts. And the one thing that nobody knows, is the polypharmacy of it all. One, the lion's share of these drugs are black market. So the dosage and exact thing that we're injecting, taking, whatever, we don't really know. Even if they are pharmaceutically based, they're actual, you get them from a compounding pharmacy or whatever. We don't know how in this specific person with these specific genetic predispositions, doing this activity, taking these supplements with these multiple medications, how they interact. The way that I view these scenarios is kind of a less is more, because the more of these PED variables you throw in, the less you know what's doing what. And don't get me wrong, I've done a kitchen sink approach for myself before, just because we like doing this stuff on ourselves. We got to check it. We got to try it out. But the reality is we don't know in these scenarios 100% what we're doing. A lot of it is guesswork. A lot of it is seeing what happens, right? And so doing more, whether it's more of particular steroids or more of a thermogenic, right? That obviously isn't always better and can be counterintuitive, especially as we, approximate a show, because now we have more systemic stress. Again, going back to that. So, like I said, to me, less is more, and the drugs will facilitate things like recovery, things like fat loss. But the majority of what we're doing is with the diet, is what's getting shit, dude. I tell people, if you did anything else in a couple of days before a show, just make sure you get 8 hours of sleep. Like, I think people, they underestimate the effect of all these low-hanging fruit lifestyle simple things and overestimate what the drugs are going to do.
100%. And then it's funny that you mentioned sleep, because the way that sleep affects everything, we know that. We could do a whole episode on sleep, but we do know that sleep and adequate rest and recovery is going to be a make it or break it thing for any athlete, any human being trying to be healthy, really. And then circling back into the concept of PEDs and applying the right ones at the right time, one simple thing that might be incredibly simple to us that I feel that everybody else tends to be overlooking is many of these PEDs, in a very direct way, the stimulants, the clenbuterols, the thyroid hormones and whatnot, but even your anabolic androgenic steroids, these are all, at least to some degree, excitatory. They're pushing you into a sympathetic state of your nervous system. The more sympathetic you are, and for those of you that might not be familiar, that's your kind of go, go, go versus parasympathetic rest and digest, the less your body's going to be able to recover. So we get in these points where people are taking so much shit that their nervous system is so amped 24/7 that you're taking all of these drugs to try and get a result, but your sleep, which should be up here, is now down here. So now you need more drugs, which is tanking sleep and recovery, and your just general nervous system as a whole. People don't realize that when you can't regulate your autonomic nervous system, your body cannot prepare itself for the next day, so you can't adequately perform, probably not even 10 to 20% of what you could otherwise. How important is the actual selection of PEDs and doses to this, as well as other things that could be facilitating either progress or detrimental effects? And how do you build this?
Well, I think it's markedly important, obviously. Again, I'm always someone, and I know a lot of people say this, but truly is conservative in this realm because of all the aforementioned things that I brought up. But the way that I employ them, and again, Do I work with people that use PEDs? Absolutely. But that's probably 20%, 10 to 20%. So I really don't have to worry about it that much. But again, the way that I employ it is, again, less is more. It's on an individual basis. I don't necessarily trust where a lot of people get their supplements from. And so it really, I know this is a very ambiguous answer, but it really depends. I have no scripted protocol for X, Y. I mean, which again, going back to the teams of bodybuilding, there should be no scripted protocol like, oh, I use women get this amount of Anavar and this amount of clenbuterol. No, it's based upon the person in front of me, right? So it goes back to the same thing to do with diet, the same thing to do with training. Is drugs are also going to be tailored per the individual. I've had women that won women's physique overall on 5 milligrams of Anavar, and others that have to take 5 times that much. Rather, it's not prescriptive from me, but if they were to take that and get 1/10 of the result, the genetic response to drugs is massive, which everyone on the stage this last weekend is a product of, not that they don't work hard, not that they don't take PEDs, it's a product of their genetics, right? So it really is same thing with training. Start with the lowest effective that I would feel that person, see how they respond, titrate up. And again, in that final push period, I'm not finally pushing really with any drugs. If I don't get somebody ready 2 to 3 weeks out with an appropriate amount of work, sleep, training, and PEDs, I didn't do my job. Have I been there? Sure. But I plan not to be, and I'm usually not.
In your opinion, what's the most heavily abused or misused PED right now?
That's a really good one. I think just in general, malapplication or the negligence that goes to using PEDs, especially androgens in women, right? The reason I say that is because the effects, or what we might call side effects, and you know this, that come along, that women experience, a lot of them are irreversible. For us, oh man, your HDL goes down for a bit. We could probably just go on a TRT dose and be just fine after that. And hey, that happens. But you know what? I can live with it. I still am a decent looking dude, right? But some of the stuff that happens to women is it doesn't go back. And I think that's probably the malapplication or misappropriation of PEDs with competitive physique women, right? There, less is more.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, I know that situationally, you probably find yourself in the position, as I do quite often, where, and it's a testament to what you do, but you kind of wind up being the fixer. So when somebody gets messed up by somebody else, they find their way to you. And you were touching on some of these permanent effects that females face. What's some of this stuff that you have to try to fix, and how long does it take to fix it? And is it even fixable?
There are some coaches that will say things like an enlarged clitoris or a deepening of the voice or hair loss is reversible. And I think maybe to some extent, maybe hair loss, some of those things there are some, they can get a bit better, right? But I think what I see most is basically they're amenorrheic, right? So they lose a period. I've had people, it takes a year. Some come back within, 8 weeks. But it's probably that they're amenorrheic and have some type of adaptation from a thyroid standpoint that we have to recover. That's what I see most, because most of it isn't just in general. And this is physique athletes, but also people that have a similar goal but don't compete, are women that just basically crash themselves, right? Or they don't crash, a coach crashes them, right? And so I have to pick up the pieces of that. And the unfortunate thing is it takes time. And it's a really hard sell. to sell somebody who's already moving in the wrong direction in terms of their body composition that it's going to take 6 months, that it might take a year, because we don't know. It depends on how they respond. Like I said, I've had people that were amenoretic that came back in 6 to 8 weeks. Some that takes a year. It just depends on the person, their genetic predisposition, the depth and breadth of, the caloric deficit they had before, whatever PEDs they were using. But that for sure is a fixable thing. It just takes time. And it breaks my heart to see it. And it's really hard as a coach to help with it, because you have to be the person that is patient with them and not give in to it. Because all of these individuals, again, it's mostly female, they want to cut. At that point, it's not working. How do I lose body fat? It's like, you're not going to be doing that right now. We have to go a little bit in the other direction. If we do it intelligently, you're going to come out the best possible, least amount of fat gain. But that is probably the most prevalent thing that I see, not just in bodybuilding, but also in the general population, because it is so popular now.
I was going to ask, and you basically just answered it yourself. How many times has a female come to you ready to start a prep or a cut or a weight loss phase, only for you to have to tell her that we actually have to go the other direction for probably 6 months, or it's not going to happen, or that's potentially longer? It's so commonplace, and it's such a hard discussion to have, because the worst thing about it is, that there's somebody out there that's going to give them what they want, even if it's not going to be what's best for them, if you don't do it. The same way if a guy comes to you and he's dead set on running a gram of tren a week, there's somebody out there that's going to tell him it's okay and just tell him what he wants to hear. So pivoting over to the guys a little bit, what do you think in the male bodybuilding world, or even just the world of males wanting to enhance themselves, what's going on there? What's the most common thing you're seeing from men where they're making mistakes that could be incredibly detrimental to their health?
I made a piece of content of this recently, because again, I work with a lot of gen pop, a lot of men, 30, 40, 50, 60, is testosterone replacement therapy has become massively popular in the last 5 to maybe 10 years. And again, I'm not a doctor, but it's not a tremendously complex regimen, right? But the amount of doctors who drop the ball in regards to testosterone replacement therapy is staggering. The lack of competency, not just competency, but the lack of paying attention, the lack of negligence, what I'd even call, I consider malpractice in these testosterone replacement or hormone replacement organizations, companies, whatever, businesses. It's rampant. And I think that there's been a large business opportunity that came about because they saw that it was so popular, it was going to be a thing, that it brought into the market a lot of people with a lot of dollars and low competency.
100% agreed. And there are good ones out there.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I don't want to say for the most part, but there's a lot of situations where they're just the new pill mills. They're like pain clinics. They're just servicing customers that come in that want an end result, and they get it. And as I'm sure you saw in your time here in Florida, they're a dime a dozen, and they're getting shut down and opened up left and right. And some of the things that you see going on there, they're staggeringly bad. Let's pivot a little bit, staying on the topic of PEDs, because people like to talk about PEDs.
They're great.
What do you think? What are some PEDs that are lesser known that have tremendous upsides that people just aren't taking advantage of?
It's hard to say they're not taking advantage of, because stuff is so popular now. I think a lot of what we're seeing is like a lot of mitochondrial efficiency-based things, whether we're talking about SLUPP 332, methylene blue, I think was it MOTC, obviously injectable L-carnitine. It's hard for me to call it a PED, but I suppose it is. I think a lot of people are becoming more keen to it. I don't necessarily know that people aren't using them, because I think the people that I see are in front of these clinics that provide them. I mean, I'm also consuming information where I'm learning about these things or hearing about them. It's funny when you say this. I think a lot of people they're gravitating, and this is coming from a guy who does enjoy himself some good PEDs. They go for that. They'll dig into that. And I see this all too often without sleeping enough or without eating well, so it's funny because it's not like a a sexy answer, but I've seen so much cool stuff coming out, and it's only going to get better. I think the proper utilization of these GLPs are the generations to come in for not just the obese person, but for someone who's trying to improve health and body composition. I see utility there done intelligently. A lot of these things that maybe have less of negative consequences in terms of, like, let's say bodybuilders. The only lever that we had to pull in the past, at least that people would use, was just more androgens. Or we just use more anabolics, or we use, in a cutting phase, we use more thermogenics, where it's like, now we're seeing, okay, well, what if we just got shit to work better at a cellular level? Things like, what is it? Steve, Dr. Dean St. Martin, Kurt Havens, love Kurt, are talking about these things where it's actually, you can lessen the burden of some of these things that may have plausibly more side effects, like anabolics, for doing these things that improve basically your physiology better, make you, healthier, plausibly, to improve the effects of all the other PEDs you're using. And I see that as kind of a future frontier, is maybe people are going to be leaning less into the anabolic side of things and more into this side, this probably more gray area, where we are seeing more bodybuilders using GLPs and, their, tirzepatide, retatrutide, and things of that nature. And they can back off. Like, think about this. If you wouldn't have to use as much T3, as much Clen, which have this sympathetic burden, if you just weren't as hungry.
I agree with that so much. And we're in this frontier now where things are evolving and things are changing, and they're starting to change faster. And like you, I love me some PEDs. So I've been using stuff for the better part of 20 years. I did my first cycle of Deca only when I was 21 years old. And I've been on and off ever since. But now, like I mentioned before, I turned 40 today. I'm 4 decades old. So I'm not a competitive bodybuilder. I make money off of my physique based in that it's my marketing, but I have no reason or no desire or no real ability to drive huge doses of anabolics anymore. And I've done it. I've run like 2.5 grams of gear, probably closer to 3 at some point. I also used to be close to 270 pounds. Now I'm 195.
Big boy.
But I can say confidently right now that my anabolic steroid dosage, first of all, I rode on nothing but TRT for about 3 years, and now I won't let it go above 300 to 400 milligrams at the very most, but I am utilizing GLPs. I'm using retatrutide right now. I've utilized SLU PP332 a few times, 5-amino 1MQ, lots of NAD, lots of injectable carnitine. And I see these things as not only this amazing frontier in that if used properly, they can actually increase lifespan, increase quality of life, increase positivity, and not just have negative side effects, but they only work if you do. And they only work if applied correctly. Now, you take trenbolone and you take an arbitrary dose of it, you can slam that at 2 a.m, 3 p.m, take it 3 days on, 5 days off, forget a day, take it another day, and shit's going to happen. Not good shit, but you're going to see your body change. Something will happen. You will become more muscular. You will become leaner. Injectable L-carnitine, if you don't take it at the right time, in the right amount, the right way, absolutely nothing will happen. But if you take it the right way, you're going to transform in an incredibly quick amount of time. And that's where I think we're at this new frontier, where coaches that take their time to educate themselves and coaches that understand how energy systems work, how cellular biology at least functions on a base level. This is where we're going to kind of take the opportunity to go, okay, here's how we do things. So we are at this amazing frontier right here. Overall, what do you think needs to happen to the coaching industry to elevate everybody to at least a higher standard? What's the biggest thing that's missing, and how do we fix it?
Well, that is a tough question, a very large question to ask. I think that all we can do, and I've been jaded in this industry all too many times. And I came to the conclusion that all I can do, all you can do to make this better is to do what we're doing right now, is to put out content and information that is truly, well, it's factual, it's true, it's helpful to the best of our knowledge, to be a voice that is not, it's hard to say counter to a lot of the bullshit that's out there, but we need more people like us, like everyone that you've had on your show so far, to put really good information out there. That's what people are exposed to, rather than all the BS. And that's really the only way that's going to change, is because after a while, people that are articulate, that are smart, that are showing results, that know what they're doing, if we begin to have a louder voice, we're going to become the majority and positive things are going to happen. There's always going to be garbage because, frankly, there's garbage people. And there's also people, I'd say, from a content standpoint, that's purely naivety and ignorance. That's going to happen. But people like you and I, and you've been stuck into this. I've been working in my business. I've been working with people. I haven't been doing this to make content because I'm helping real people, but I'm helping 55 to 60 at a time. And having more people do this at mass, getting out factual information to truly actually educate people. And I don't want to, have this hubris to think that I'm the smartest person in the world, because I'm not. There's so many people that I look up to that are experts, but we just need more voices like ours, to be completely honest, in order for it to change. Because otherwise, the way that the algorithm works, the way that so much with social media works right now, if we don't have these rational, educated voices out there, it's going to continue to trend in the direction it has been.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Adam, if somebody wants to work with you or just absorb more of your content, where do they find you?
On Instagram, it's BesickFit, BESICKFIT. BesickFit at Gmail is an email. It's the best way to get a hold of me, either an Instagram message or email.
Awesome. Adam, thank you so much for being on the show. Everybody, we're going to have Adam back here because there's so much other stuff that we can deep dive into. It's so hard to condense this type of stuff into an hour, but we'll have him back very soon. In the meantime, please go absorb his content. If you're looking into coaching, lifestyle, contest prep, anything in between, hit him up on his social media. You will not be disappointed. This is the DDT Method Podcast, and we will catch you next week.